The moment the clip hit social media, the question was already spreading faster than the final lap at Watkins Glen. Cameras caught Bubba Wallace and Christopher Bell in what looked like a very intense exchange on pit road after the race, and within minutes, the internet had already made up its mind about what was happening. Bubba's body language was animated, his hands were moving, and Bell appeared to be standing there listening. From every angle the broadcast captured, this looked like a confrontation, a post-race blow-up between two drivers who had just come off a rough afternoon. But here is the detail that made this moment so puzzling to anyone paying close attention. Bubba Wallace finished 29th, and Christopher Bell finished 21st. Neither of them had anything on the line for the win. Neither of them was fighting for a podium. So why did this become one of the most talked about moments of the entire race weekend? Because what this looked like and what this actually was turned out to be two very different things, and the story behind that gap is worth telling in full. To understand the pit road exchange, you first have to understand the race itself and how the day unfolded for everyone on the track. Shane van Gisbergen was dominant from the very beginning at Watkins Glen. He started on pole, controlled enormous stretches of the race, and even after a late green flag pit cycle shuffled him back in the running order, he cut through traffic like the race was already his to lose. With 8 laps to go, SVG passed Ty Gibbs for the lead and pulled away without any real challenge. When the checkered flag dropped, the final margin between Van Gisbergen and second-place finisher Michael McDowell was more than 7 seconds. The top 5 on the day came out as Van Gisbergen, McDowell, Gibbs, Chase Briscoe, and Tyler Reddick, a clean, largely drama-free story at the front of the field. Nobody paying attention to the leaders had any reason to expect controversy. But further back in the running order, the story was completely different. Bell finished 21st, which was quietly disappointing but not a headline on its own. Bubba Wallace finished 29th, and that finish did not come quietly at all, because his race had unraveled in a very visible way in the final laps. To understand why Bubba was animated on pit road after the race, you have to go back and understand exactly what happened to his day in those final 15 laps. With roughly 15 laps to go, Wallace got spun, and this is a critical fact that needs to be stated clearly right from the start. The car that got into Bubba and caused that spin was John Hunter Nemechek, not Christopher Bell. Early social media reaction tried to connect Bell to the spin, but that connection was wrong. Nemechek was the driver involved in that moment, and the impact left Wallace with damage and cost him significant track position at a point in the race where making up ground was already extremely difficult. He was now trying to salvage whatever he could from an afternoon that had already gone badly sideways. Then, with roughly 8 laps remaining, Wallace was called to pit road, and this is where the communication breakdown that led to everything else actually happened. Bell had a run building toward turn 6 at that moment, and his team reportedly told him the number 23 car was pitting. The problem was that the message came too late. By the time Bell received that information, he was already running side by side with Wallace through the corner sequence, Bell on the inside, Bubba on the outside. With Bell right there next to him and additional cars stacked up behind, Wallace had no clean path to make pit entry. He had to slow down and let multiple cars go by just to safely get off the racing surface. Cody Ware was also on track and limping around during this same stretch, adding another layer of chaos to an already messy situation. On the final results sheet, that sequence registers as nothing significant. But inside the car, in the final laps of a race that had already fallen apart, that moment carries real weight. That is the frustration that was still clearly sitting on Bubba's shoulders when the cameras found him on pit road after the checkered flag flew. What viewers at home saw during the broadcast was a post-race scene that the cameras were drawn to immediately. Fox cameras picked up the exchange right after the race ended, and Bubba's body language was visibly intense, hands moving, posture animated, all of it reading as heated from the outside. Bell appeared to be listening and responding. The whole thing, from a broadcast perspective, looked like a confrontation between two drivers. Then Kevin Harvick delivered the line from the booth that put a label on exactly what every viewer at home was already processing: "I don't think we're good right here." 7 words, and they did the job perfectly from a television standpoint. That clip was on social media within minutes of airing. The headline practically wrote itself: Bubba Wallace confronting Christopher Bell on pit road after a bad finish at Watkins Glen. And the internet did exactly what the internet always does with that kind of material. The fan reaction that followed on X covered just about every possible angle. Some fans took the position that Bell had done nothing wrong and that the criticism aimed at him was unfair. The argument from that side was straightforward: Bell had cars behind him, He was still actively racing, and he could not simply hand Bubba the inside line without consequences for his own race. Is Bell supposed to let cars pass him just to give Bubba room to pit? That's not how racing works, was the kind of comment that represented that perspective. Others used the moment as an entry point for a much broader attack on Bubba's career, comments that had nothing to do with the specific sequence of events at Watkins Glen and everything to do with a pre-existing opinion about Wallace as a driver. Christopher Bell has forgotten more about racing than Bubba ever will. He's been in top equipment for years and gets embarrassed by his teammate every week, was the kind of comment circulating widely. Stephen Tordo offered a detailed breakdown noting that Bell's team did not inform him the number 23 was pitting until Bell was already running alongside Wallace, which put Bubba in a position where he could not cut across Bell's nose and had to let 3 cars go by just to safely make pit entry. Tordo also noted that he did not hear Bubba say a cross word toward Bell on the radio, which made assigning definitive blame difficult from a technical standpoint. And then there were the comments that had nothing to do with racing at all. Bubbles is always crying, who cares about Bubba? The kind of responses that confirmed the conversation had stopped being about the incident within about 10 seconds of the clip going live. This is the pattern that follows Bubba Wallace more than almost any other driver in the sport right now. The conversation rarely stays on the specific incident. It expands almost immediately into a referendum on his career, his equipment, his temperament, his place in the sport. Whether you agree with his racing decisions or not, that expansion is what always happens. But here is the thing about all of that reaction, it was built almost entirely on a clip without full context. And the full context was about to arrive from a source that no one could reasonably dismiss. Freddy Craft is Bubba Wallace's spotter. That means he is in radio communication with Wallace throughout every single race, he knows the team's internal dynamics, and he had a direct view of what was actually happening during those final laps at Watkins Glen. When Craft saw the speculation building online, people framing the pit road exchange as a confrontation, a rivalry moment, a blow-up between 23XI racing teammates, he stepped in publicly to correct the record. His response was short, direct, and it landed like a bucket of cold water on the entire narrative that had been building since the clip went viral. Freddy Craft stated plainly, "You shouldn't speculate." Bubba wasn't mad at Bell. That statement carries significant weight when you consider who is saying it and what his position gives him access to. If Bubba's own spotter, the person who hears everything Wallace says during a race, who communicates with the team at every stage, steps in publicly to correct the viral framing, then the viral framing falls apart. It means the assumption that Bubba was confronting Bell in anger was not accurate. Maybe Wallace was walking Bell through exactly what the pit entry felt like from inside the car, explaining the sequence from his perspective without it being a hostile exchange. Maybe the body language looked heated from 50 feet away through a broadcast lens, but the actual tone of the conversation was something completely different. Maybe the frustration that was visible in Bubba's body language was still carrying over from the Nemechek spin earlier in the race, and Bell just happened to be standing there in a moment that had nothing to do with him personally. The clip looked like a fight. The spotter says it wasn't. And that is the most important piece of information available right now. Zooming out from the specific incident, the bigger picture for both drivers deserves attention. For Christopher Bell, this sequence probably does not become a long-running storyline unless something else surfaces. He finished 21st, had a tough day, and there is no credible evidence that anything he did during that pit sequence was intentional or designed to block Wallace. The communication timing was the issue, not Bell's intent. For Bubba Wallace, the finish itself is the real problem that needs addressing. Starting 18th and finishing 29th at Watkins Glen is not the kind of result the number 23 team can afford to absorb without consequence, especially with playoff pressure always present and the margin for error in this sport shrinking every week. The emotional visibility that Bubba carries, the animated conversations, the body language that cameras seem to find instinctively, the refusal to hide what he is feeling in difficult moments, that is simply part of who he is as a competitor. He does not conceal frustration. And in the social media era of NASCAR, that visibility means every heated moment becomes a potential headline, regardless of whether the moment actually deserves that level of attention. The broader lesson from this entire sequence is one that applies across NASCAR coverage at every level: a clip is not a complete story. A post-race conversation that looks intensely heated from a distance and through a broadcast lens might be something entirely different when you have the actual context. That gap between what something looks like and what it actually is, that is where most NASCAR drama lives, and this was a near-perfect example of it playing out in real time. Here is the full picture of what actually happened this weekend. Shane van Gisbergen dominated at Watkins Glen and won by more than 7 seconds over Michael McDowell. Bubba Wallace had a race fall apart in the final 15 laps, first from a spin caused by John Hunter Nemechek, and then from a chaotic pit entry sequence where a communication delay left him no clean path off the track. Christopher Bell, who had been told too late that the number 23 was pitting, ended up alongside Wallace through the corner and played a role in the messy sequence even without any intent to interfere. The cameras caught an animated post-race conversation between Bubba and Bell, and Kevin Harvick put words to what it looked like from the broadcast booth. Social media ran with the clip. The pylon followed. And then Freddy Craft, Bubba's own spotter, stepped in and said directly, "You shouldn't speculate." Bubba wasn't mad at Bell. That is the complete story. The real question was never whether Bubba appeared angry on pit road. The real question is why so many people were so ready to assume the worst before a single person with actual knowledge of the situation had weighed in. If you made it to the end of this one, this story clearly held your attention, and that means you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Hit that like button, drop a comment below telling us whether you think fans overreacted to this clip or whether the concern was legitimate given what the cameras showed. Do not miss the next one. Subscribe now.